Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. In this series of videos I'm talking about the world of Destiny and the creatures, characters and factions that inhabit it. In this moment of stillness we can stop and see the world for the garden that it is, with the hope that one day it shall bloom once more. Today though, our story begins in a different garden. A garden before time. This tale has had many arcs across the ages of the cosmos, but its present arc, which I must pray will one day be continued, begins with a ship. One day the lost city's orbital defense grid was pinged and intruded upon by an incoming unidentified craft. It approached at significant speed and bypassed several layers of the lost city's defenses before being shot down. Such measures might seem severe, but after the massacre of Guardians by Dredge and Bale at Tharsis Outpost, nobody wanted to take the risks. A single craft behind the defenses of the city was all an interloper might need to sow chaos. Investigating the wreckage of the jump ship confirmed what sensor arrays had picked up in the moments before the craft was shot down. There was a Guardian aboard. The Guardian in question was none other than Shiro 4, a hunter of some renown who was once a great friend to the former Vanguard hunter mentors Cade 6 and Andal Brask. Shiro had last been seen during the Siva crisis, where he had coordinated the Guardian response to the threat of the House of Devils and their rising cult of splicers. His next task had been a long reconnaissance mission that led him outside of Sol for an extended sortie. Now he had returned, albeit with no shortage of haste and a distinct lack of caution. The wreckage of his craft was investigated by Onor Mahal, a warlock of the Praxic Order. Within, they found Shiro barely alive. When he came to, his words were desperate and specific. Praxic. Onor. Oh, good, I'm on Earth. Shiro coughs out a wry smile, then inhales sharply and twists to pull his arm into view. In his outstretched hand, Shiro extends his ghost, motionless and quiet. Help Suzume. It tried to take her. Tell the Guardian, they have to know. It's waiting. At the Shard. Suzume is presumably Shiro 4's ghost. Why it is inactive now, what attempted to take it, and the other questions of his sortie are thus far unanswered. Whatever it was that tried to take Suzume, Shiro 4 believed that it could be found at the Shard. This was almost undoubtedly referring to the Shard of the Traveler in the European Dead Zone, a remnant of the last titanic battle of the collapse that had been left within the twisted reaches of the Dark Forest. Traveling there, we found something irregular. The Dark Forest, whose points of ingress are usually barred shut, had suddenly opened, taken portals leading us deeper in a pathway down to the forest's deepest reaches. It might have been a mistake to venture inside, but curiosity has always been a luxury Guardians could afford to indulge. Death is of little consequence to those chosen by the Traveler to be its risen champions. And so we entered. When we reached the darkest heart of the forest, we found a familiar Shard of the Traveler, where some of our powers were rediscovered, near the end of the Red War. Standing before it, in a state of some distress, was Lodi, the newly elected emissary of the Nine. His cosmic burden is to be a host to the great consciousnesses of the planetary minds in our system, to be a mouthpiece through which these Nine could commune with us. But this time, Lodi gave voice to something not of the system or the Nine. It crept out of shadow into a vessel that had been prepared for it. a vessel selected by other gods, by rite and ceremony, for a purpose of communion. For as the taken king Oryx once foresaw, that is how it arrives. The deep itself.
Hello, Inca Chum. There's blood on our hands, isn't there? From this little spat. Even they know it. That our meeting is inevitable. The Eternal Nine. Big deal. Between you and me, who isn't? You know, the pieces they want you to knock down are already set. Ending with me. Showdown at the end of time between champions of dark and light. That's why they courted you. Impressed their own importance upon you. They need your violence because I exist. But they don't get to put you on hold and walk away. Drag those 8 egos back in. Do what you do best. Impose your will. That's what a weapon's for, after all. End it on your terms. This is what you wanted, isn't it? In your heart of hearts. Don't worry. When it's over, I won't abandon you. Take a breather. Take your libations. Let that vigor seep back into your bones. Get hungry.
That wasn't a 9. But it knew you. Very well. I don't know what that was.
This entity that spoke through Lodi was known as the Winnower. Veteran guardians or those who have studied Apocrypha of a darker nature will know its name well. Today, I wanted to give you all as much insight as I could about this ancient being that has been watching us so closely and for so long. The first thing you should know is that a lot of what we know about the Winnower is what it tells us about itself. This creature, entity, thing, whatever it might be, has been there persistently in the background, but has been communicating with us for some time, albeit in a much more sporadic manner. But whenever we have learned something about it, we have almost exclusively learned that knowledge because it was given to us directly by the Winnower itself. The only 2 exceptions to this rule are the recollections of Oryx, the Taken King, found in the Books of Sorrow, and the words of the Witness to us, as we ascended its monolith to put a stop to the final shape. With this in mind, it should be soundly understood that all knowledge we have on the Winnower could well be lies, or could simply be its perspective that unfairly colors its assertions and paints it in a more favorable light. We do not know if it has reason to lie to us, so all the information that follows should be understood with the cautious acknowledgement that even truth to a being such as the Winnower might be of little consequence. If we're to look back at the earliest communications that might be between the Winnower and ourselves, we actually need to return to the grimoire. Whilst this might not have been intended to be the Winnower at the time of writing, it seems to fit the intentions of its character nonetheless. In Ghost Fragment Darkness 4, an unknown voice speaks to an unspecified listener. The words seem to fit the tone of an address to our guardian well enough. It implores us to consider whether our lot in unlife is fair. We have been raised to struggle on, at the end of days, without freedom. The unknown voice in this grimoire entry implored us to think of the choices set before us, even as it agreed upon a single idea that we had demonstrated by our capacity for violence in defense of our home. The idea was simple. The war is everything. It is impossible to say if this was the Winnower reaching out, but if it is, this would indicate that it has been watching our guardians since the earliest days of our reawakening. The ghost containing this message was recovered from nearby to the endless steppes on Venus, overlooking the site of our battle with the Gate Lord Zydron, whose eye we used to enter the Black Garden. But it is also easy to assume, and perhaps more simple to verify, that the first real communication between us and the Winnower was within the Book of Unveiling. It is within these pages that the Winnower espouses its key beliefs. That existence should be for the strong because the weak suffer in the presence of the strong. That if the weak simply did not exist at all, there would be less suffering in the world, and that a moral good would be achieved as a result. Here, it also told us of its supposed origins, and if it is to be believed, the origins of the universe itself. Long ago, before the beginning of time, the Gardener and the Winnower existed in a field of possibility that prefigured all of existence. They called it the Garden, and there are strong suggestions that this might be the same place as the Black Garden, a unique realm separated from time and dimension, which is often only accessible by the Vex. The garden bloomed with one of the mythical trees of silver wings, and beneath its leaves and branches, the Gardener and Winnower would gather. In that garden, these two inherent beings, whose existence was as necessary as the Prime's, played a game of possibilities. It was the flower game. It had set rules, and within those rules, entire patterns of existence played out day by day. But the days in the garden were longer than lifetimes of the system we live within. They were as eons, and they charted the course of entire universes. By day, rapturous life grew within the garden as it was within the flower game, and it was nurtured by the gardener in the light of day. But by the fall of dusk, the Winnower would come, and would take a scything blade to all life that was not strong enough to survive. This would result in patterns that survived, and patterns that did not. Over countless cycles of the flower game, the same pattern of life would always develop as the winning strategy, the same final shape to existence. Supposedly, the monotony of this repeated pattern infuriated the gardener, who insisted on adding a new rule so that other, more complex forms of life might flourish. The Winnower's recounting of the tale notes that this was a cause of great disagreement. It was the original conflict. It proclaimed that from such a decision, unnecessary suffering would be born into the universe, and that in the end, under its scything blade, the result would be the same regardless. From this disagreement, violence brewed between the gardener and the Winnower. As the titanic forces before time wrestled within the garden, they birthed the universe from their struggle. Primal patterns escaped the garden as it burned beneath the clashing giants. This life included the brass-clad frames of the Vex that haunt the passageways of the Black Garden to this day. And in all the chaos, the Tree of Silver Wings, which once sheltered the fecund life of the garden, was struck down. Its stump was left to smoke amid the meadows. This is how we know the Black Garden must be the garden before time. You can still see the stump to this day, though it is often mistaken for a distant plateau, a mesa rising from the garden channels, circled with light and memory. And so the battle between the gardener and the winnower went on. And according to the words of the winnower, it won. It won because the gardener always stopped to offer peace. It was in the nature of the winnower's logic to always strike in such moments. But the winnower's victory in the garden was irrelevant. The patterns of the flower game had fled from the black garden and had broken into the nascent universe. The game of creation that had been confined to the garden's channels would now play out across the newly born cosmos, and the gardener and the winnower would begin their struggles anew. In the end of these recountings and tales, the winnower posed a question to us. If only the living have moral value, should we mourn the uncreated? After all, if something is never born, it cannot bear the suffering of life or death. It imparted its perspective unto us, stating that the gardener was playing for keeps, but had gone all in on what the winnower perceived to be the wrong bet, the wrong strategy. It told us that we were supposedly the gardener's final argument, and in that sense, the gardener only saw us as a means to an end, created from the chosen dead. The winnower told us that it saw us differently, as something majestic. It saw us as one of the only things worth anything at all in this cosmos, because guardians are survivors, warriors, killers. In the eyes of the sword logic, we were undoubtedly on the winning team of existence, and it asked us if we would not agree that our power had allowed us to go on existing amongst the victorious few. Its final words to us cut short our chance to reply, as it told us, "Don't hurry to deliver your answer. I'll come over and hear it myself." These communications might be confusing to some. At a similar time, we had made our first contact with the witness in uneasy communion within the deepest reaches of Nezarek's lunar pyramid. Conflating these two ancient enemies might be a simple mistake to make, but it is always possible to distinguish between them simply based on how they refer to themselves. The witness is a multitude of voices united in a singular purpose. Therefore, it always refers to itself with the pronoun of we. The winnower, on the other hand, is a singular force with a singular mind, and therefore always refers to itself with the pronoun of I. The communications in the Book of Unveiling always use I, meaning they are likely coming from the winnower. Meanwhile, the communion at the end of Shadowkeep, featuring a shadowy doppelganger, always involves that doppelganger using the pronoun of we. And whilst the witness refers to salvation, the winnower prefers to emphasize when something is majestic, often repeating the word. Our first encounter with the winnower might have been through the Book of Unveiling on Luna, but it was not the first time that it had ever reached out from beyond and interacted with a powerful being. As best we know, the first recorded moment when the winnower reached out to another form of life was to Oryx in the Books of Sorrow. After the destruction of a people known as the Taisha Beth, the Taken King Oryx proclaimed to the hive swarms that they had conquered their way to the edge of the deep, and that he would go to commune with it. Thus Oryx went down into his throne world. He read his tablets of ruin, and they gave him purchase within the abyss. He created an altar and prepared an unborn ogre there, and called upon the deep. He said, "I can see you in the sky. You are the waves which are battles, and the battles are the waves. Come into this vessel I have prepared for you." And then it arrived. the deep itself. It is not plainly stated, but it seems clear that from that moment, the Winnower appears to have indwelled within the unborn ogre, so that it might speak to Oryx. It even spoke with the same casual tone as it used to communicate with us. This communication would seem to confirm something about the nature of the Winnower, which is something reinforced by the beliefs of the Hive, that it is formless. This is commonly stated in Hive Apocrypha, but the consequence of such formlessness is that it's likely that the Winnower manifests directly from the Ascendant Plane, or wherever it resides. That formlessness also would imply that the Winnower needs a vessel to inhabit if it's going to communicate directly with someone. In the case of Oryx, it was a ceremonial ogre. In the case of us by the Shard of the Traveler, it was Lodi, the emissary of the Nine. This also seems to confirm that Lodi's position as emissary allows him the unique ability to host not only the Nine, but also other great consciousnesses and beings. It's hard to confirm such a thing, but under the right circumstances it's not hard to imagine him hosting the voice of a departed Ahamkara, a Hive god, or maybe even the gardener itself. But alas, if such moments were to occur in the Fate Saga, we might never find out now. The Winnower's communications with Oryx would culminate in a moment where it helped him to once again accept and adopt the purest understandings of the sword logic, to see his siblings as competitors, to see the world as a realm of inward-pointed spears closing in on him, to perceive the ever-tightening noose of the cosmos and its furious competition. With illusions and harsh teachings, it emboldened Oryx to embody the praxis of violence that it preached. And yet again it would call this idea, this simple idea, majestic. Majestic. Speaking of Oryx and all things majestic, it is worth observing something that Lodi is forced to suffer in the beginning of his communion. This might seem a strange thing to highlight, this twitching and contortion. The breaking and bending of limbs doesn't seem like anything more than the inhabitation of something cruel. But it does remind me of words spoken about the Taken years ago at their introduction. As Mark Noseworthy and Michael Zack put it,
Oryx is here, and he's brought with him an evil army of corrupted Taken. Combatants that have been ripped out of our dimension and sent back with new powers and new abilities. And they're going to challenge players in new ways.
We wanted to do something that retained elements of where the Taken came from, but that unified them. So they've got like this supernatural flame that's burning them from the inside. And because we wanted to communicate their will being erased, they tend to have jitter in their animations and sort of a tortured look to them.
The incessant twitching of the Taken and Lodi's contortions are another note to the fairly well-established idea that the Winnower might actually be the one who is corrupting the Taken. Oryx and those who control the power of the Taken do not actually control the corruption themselves, as we have discovered, because taking something is not corrupting it. To take something is to move it between dimensions. It is something else on the other side that husks out the abductees with violence and that inverse light that burns them from within. And when they are flayed, like something caught in a spider's web, the creature is also ensnared, contorted, and controlled by a will greater than its own, a will that it will obey forevermore, for that is all the Taken crave, direction. And of course this will is no longer its own. This observation isn't anything definitive, more theoretical than factual, but the communications from Oryx in Heresy seem to push this idea further. The presence of the upstart Taken God, known as the Lord of Every Nothing, registered as a presence that would supplant the Winnower's normal role within the Taken's creation. The echo of the Navigator made such a point.
We are not alone in the deep. Something I cannot see stands between the Winnower and the Taken. Carve these offerings free from their weakness, King, before something else does.
The Taken King was at the time perhaps the greatest adherent to the Winnower's logic, but even those who are sharp can be blunted and broken. Clearly, the Winnower must have seen the events that unfolded in the Taken War, and it must have been there too to watch our titanic battle within the Ascendant Plane with the Taken King itself. In fact, it is my belief that you can even trace this idea to specific moments within our encounter with Oryx. When Oryx raises his two fists full of black fire, ready to wipe us from existence, he is actually enacting what is called a doxology. This is essentially an offering of praise to one's god. I believe that in this moment, Oryx was reaching out to the Winnower and essentially making a direct proclamation. With this doxology, he is effectively saying, I am the most powerful thing, and therefore by the right of the sword, these lesser guardians should die. If the doxology is complete, Oryx's statement is essentially proven true, and we are snuffed out by the very law to which he is praying. But of course, that is not what transpired. We proved him wrong and surpassed his strength with the strange tactic of detonating blighted light. Thus, we were allowed to go on fighting, because we had proven that our strength was enough to challenge him. Thus, by the laws of his own world, Oryx had to fight us. What's more, when our window of opportunity to strike at the king was concluded, the following was noted. Oryx regains favor with the darkness. It's a little bit of a stretch, but here in the Ascendant realm of Oryx's dreadnought, I do wonder if the Winnower was actually watching to see who the victor might be. And of course, if it was, it would not choose sides in such a moment, for the logic of its own praxis would dictate that only the strongest should survive, and that it should play no favorites. And therefore, we remain. Even past the death of the Taken King and our discoveries on the moon, we would go on to slay many other great entities, be they hive gods, disciples of the Witness, or other powerful paracausal creatures like Riven of 1,000 Voices. But in the end, we would reach a moment where our existence was once again put up in the balance. I am of course referring to the Witness, and the moments where it almost enacted the final shape. The Witness sought to reshape all of reality into its imagined calcification, its envisioned perfection, where no more life or death would exist, only eternal stillness and purpose. As we ascended the Witness's monolith, we would reach a point where it sought to commune with us directly. And here, as we approached the heart of its manifestation, it would finally speak to us of great mysteries, chief amongst them, the Winnower.
You fear answers. Fear the truth you claim to seek. Look beyond this dying garden, or rot in entropy. Each child we save from the game, you again force to play. You call us Winnower. We are not, but the first knife clutched in its hand. Gods forged us both, but they cannot tell the knife what shape to carve.
This singular moment not only separates the Winnower from the witness, but it also lends us an insight into the relationship between the two. A relationship that potentially could be summed up as created and creator. The quote here seems to imply that the Winnower had a hand in creating the witness. If the witness was the Winnower's first knife, as it calls itself, then it seems to imply that it was originally created with the intention of hindering the gardener somehow, which of course it would. To understand how, you need to understand the relation between the Winnower, gardener, traveler, and veil. If the assumptions and assertions that we've gathered over the many years are indeed correct, then it would be right to assume that the traveler and gardener are linked, just as the veil and the Winnower. As for the veil itself, which is another piece to the puzzle concerning the witness, it is the opposite of the traveler. It too is a paracausal nexus of energy of sorts, although one can think of it as one with an inverse polarity to that of the traveler. While the traveler is full of light, the veil is full of darkness. Neither are inherently good or evil, but the links of these great constructs to the gardener and Winnower is a commonplace assumption which is often proven at least feasible, if not reasonable. Understanding the presence of the veil is critical to understanding the creation of the witness. Long ago, the species that created the witness, an unknown people sometimes referred to as the precursors, were looking for the one thing that they lacked. The traveler's light and bounty had blessed them with plenty, but not with guidance, not with purpose. They sought to find it within the veil, which they eventually tracked down. They wished to merge it and the traveler together, so that they might bring about a union of purpose and possibility, and with this, they would craft a final shape, one that would allow them to usher the whole of the universe towards a more perfect harmony for all, forever. Of course, the traveler fled from this union, and left the precursors in disarray and despair. And so, in that moment of terrible darkness, they turned to the veil in desperation. And within it, they perceived an answer to their strife. It isn't impossible that in this moment of need, they ended up communing with the Winnower. In such a vulnerable state, it might have been easy for one such as the Winnower to suggest that the salvation of the precursors lay in unity, darkness, and an eternal hunt for their betrayer, the traveler. And so, if the story holds, the witness was created. Whilst such assertions are merely theoretical, it seems to fit in with the events as portrayed by the witness. And even though its final shape does not directly align with sword logic, it would no less have wounded the traveler, especially as the precursors were possibly the first that it uplifted through the light's bounty. But of course, we would defeat the witness as it approached the realization of the final shape. With the battle firmly won, it seemed for a moment as if the universe was saved, and all of life could finally exhale in relief. An uneasy silence fell over the world, and then peace? But no. In the aftermath, as the echoes flew from the traveler's pale heart, even in this moment where we stopped and caught our breath, the Winnower was still there. It sent forth a communication to us once again, with its same casual tone and jovial venom. It told us to have no fear and to gaze upon the universe that we had just saved. It told us that it looked upon this universe with glee, because everywhere within the bounds of this newly liberated cosmos, it was present. Its ideas were flourishing. Even we, in our moment of triumph atop the monolith, had proven that the strong would compete for dominance, and that a strongest one would always triumph. Our victory might have defined the start of a new age, but even as epochs pass, some things are immutable. This the Winnower observed and believed, because even beyond our conquest, every day, every hour, every second, in every corner of the universe, life was electing to follow its principles instead of the gardener's. The sword logic reigned eternal, even within the smallest of atoms and most distant of sparks. The strong naturally survived, and the weak were crushed. The Winnower told us that the same pattern it had seen in the flower game long ago was still present, that its original idea was still the victorious truth of the universe at large, that all beings in existence, be they forged in light or darkness, were still always making their choice, and they were choosing the Winnower's choice. And it promised to see us again soon. It would not take long for us to hear of the Winnower again. Merely a few months. After retrieving one of Oryx's lost tablets of ruin from within the dreadnought, it reached out again. We had boarded this place alongside Eris Morn and the Drifter in an attempt to investigate the disturbances of the Taken across the system. As we claimed the tablet, we perhaps knew the gravity of what we had just laid our hands on. When Oryx killed Akka, the worm god of secrets, he extracted one secret in particular from the great worm god's remains: the secret of communing with the deep. Oryx had taken that secret and inscribed it upon his tablets. He used those same tablets to commune with the deep, to create the vessel of the unborn ogre, to allow the deep to enter in by shadow and form. And now we too had claimed one of these tablets. Perhaps Akka's secret still held sway. Perhaps the power of the tablets rang out in the sea of screams like the bells of a distant, wicked temple. For the Winnower knew, and it deigned to reach out to us once more and speak again. It invoked us once more and reminded us of its same message of violence imposed by the strong upon the weak. It encouraged us not to be so squeamish about reaching out into the deep and controlling Taken power. It encouraged us to do so with ambition. It encouraged us to take what we wanted, regardless of the cost. It reminded us that it already knew us well, and that even though our meandering actions, falling back and forth between following its ways and not, frustrated us, it still saw us as friends, pals, chums even. And so it must have watched on, as the Lord of Every Nothing, and Savathun the Witch Queen, and Zivu Arath the Hive God of War, and Eris Morn the God of Vengeance, and the Echo of Navigation, in its memory of Oryx, all fought for power and sway over the Dreadnaught's remains. It watched as we delved deeper into the corpse of Akka turned into ship and throne world. It watched as we defied those who tried to claim the echo of the Traveler's light and the Witness's darkness. It watched as we waded amongst these titanic forces and still exerted our will over all of them. It watched. It waited. And here at last, before the shard of the traveler in the EDZ, it deigned to speak to us more directly at last. Should the page turn and another chapter of Destiny's world grace the records of history, there is little doubt that all roads lead to this Winnower and its plans, its promise, its final surest argument. It promised that at the end of time there would be a great battle, a clash between the champions of darkness and light. It stated that the Nine had anointed us as their weapon because we were the only ones whose violence might be capable of challenging the Winnower. If we are to bind the Nine as 3 instructed, I imagine that the path will invoke us taking a measure of their power to perceive time and using it to find a path that results in our victory in one manner or another. But this leads to the most ominous question of all. Can victory against something like the Winnower even be achieved? After all, if it is an immutable part of the universe, then truly there is nothing we can do. Even if we make the choice to face it and its champions of darkness in battle, our victory over it simply seals our own fate, for it is victory for the Winnower, not defeat. The elegance of the Winnower's bladed logic in this regard is similar to that of Zivur Wrath, where facing a hive god of war in war will merely empower her. In the same way, defeating the Witness implies that we are engaging with it via the praxis it has proven since before time itself began. But is this not the undeniable architecture of the very fabric of existence? The idea that there must always be a strongest one, and thus the Winnower's victory is inevitable. And as it pointed out, we cannot offer mercy, because it will always strike back under such circumstances. And so perhaps there was another way, where the strength of those who are powerful is used instead as a shield to uplift those that might normally be seen as weak. Perhaps by doing so we can prove the Winnower wrong, and show it that for every queen leading a country of armies, there is a queen that can turn their swords back into plowshares and bring peace to the cosmos in all of its vibrant complexity. But I fear the alternative is all the easier to realize. For if the Winnower truly is the victorious, majestic pattern that defines the shape of all existence, then all our resistance is but a fleeting thing that shall wither and pass, and like the once great boughs of the tree of silver wings, we shall all be doomed to burn bright, as we are rendered to ash and left, at last, alone, adrift, on the winds of eternal nightfall. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can support more of my lore content on Patreon. Signing up is free, but you can support at a paid tier if you're so inclined. There are also ways to support my content here on YouTube. Liking the video, leaving a comment, and subscribing are all very welcome. But in the meantime, know that your viewership as always has been quite enough for me, and that my name is Bife. Ad Astra et Ultra. I'll see you Starside.